It's a Craggy Rugby mini pod. We weren't expecting to. We don't normally do a little mini pod on the day before a game, but the day after we recorded our last midweek pod, of course, Jimmy announced that he was going to be leaving Connacht as well. So I've got William Davies here. William, that was a bit of a shock, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that was a bit of a shock. But as we said in regards to Nigel, coaches, players, it's their career, it's their business. And times come when they want to go and do something else. Jimmy's been here quite a long time. He's had a lot of success. He was the forwards coach when they won the Pro 12, and judging by his statement, he's looking for further opportunities in rugby to expand his knowledge and look at the game maybe a different way. And at some stage in the future, I'll be looking to chat to both himself and Nigel, because I think it's fascinating for everybody that, people come to these situations in their careers. And I think COVID has probably concentrated people's minds a little bit. People have had a lot of time to learn. They've been working differently now for a year. And you just wonder, does that get this mind flow going about making a change and making a difference to your own life in terms of what you're doing? Brilliant technical coach, fascinating man to talk to. And I've learned a lot from him, just talking to him. And it used to be great when we used to get to go away to games, which sounds something from the dark ages. And you would meet, you might be staying in the same hotel, or you might meet them socially. And just 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. They don't want to talk rugby all the time either, because that's what they do all day. But you learn stuff. And you get a better knowledge of the game, and they pass on small things to players. Keem Brendagast talked about that last week, what he's been learning from players and coaches. Well, media people, if you ask the right questions, you learn as well. They're not going to tell you their absolute setups and stuff, but they will point you sometimes in a direction that says, well, have a look at this. The game is evolving, coaches evolve. So we just wish him well, and it's going to be a fascinating journey for him, and it's going to be for Collie Tucker and
Mossy Lawler, who've been coaches together. They were together with Shannon, and also in UL Bows in the AIL. So and then they came to Connacht at more or less the same time too, and in the academy side of things. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see those guys come in and see what they can bring and what freshness they can bring, and certainly what monsterness they can bring to the Connacht squad as well. So it's interesting times, certainly. All right, so Leicester picked an interesting team today. I think their fans were quite surprised by it, and we have some audio from BBC Radio Leicester's Adam Whitty, who he also seemed a bit surprised by it, wasn't he?
I think he was shocked, actually. I think he was really caught on the hop. And he gives us a great overview of who they've brought in and how they're going to play. I think he's not expecting any fireworks from them, especially with that side. This is a dour selection to play a dour brand of rugby. That doesn't mean it's not a winning brand of rugby. And knowing what the opposition are going to do and dealing with it are two different things in sport. People will say, well, Munster play this way and Munster play that way. Well, Connacht don't beat them very often. So that's the challenge, is to deal with what's in front of you. But yes, it is, I think, a slightly under-strength selection. The key components of the England team are missing. Johnny McPhillips is an inexperienced 10, and he's barely played this season. So I think it increases Connacht's opportunity. I still think it's a very tough job for them. And when we look at their side, it's the strongest Connacht side that they can put on the field, I think.
Yep.
Bearing in mind they have two serious players suspended, and Quinru injured. Obviously, Bundyaki, Jared Butler on the suspensions. But Pete Wilkins talks about that. And I think what's really interesting with what he says is they really hit hard on what happened at the Scarlets. I think that, and initially, I think they were so shocked we didn't get much of a reaction. Because there was the press conference afterwards, and then there's no midweek press conference because Connacht didn't have a game. Maybe that was just for the best. And they've had a look at this, and I suspect, I'd say it was a pretty brutal review of that, and a few players were basically put on notice that you'll have to pick it up. He talked about communication. That's going to be absolutely key in this game, and decision making, because kicking properly, don't give away silly penalty. It's very obvious stuff, but it needs players on the field to keep talking about it and to making the right decisions and seizing the opportunity. You might not get many chances in this game. And
they need to me that, like, the opportunity is the fact that Leicester have definitely picked a second string, and in some cases third string players. Like their bench, the front row bench is just. They've two players who never played for them. But, Connacht have come up against teams who've done that and struggled before. But the other thing is the weather's going to be fantastic. So there should be no excuses for Connacht. This is a game where you'd like to see them take control and play some cracking rugby and get that much needed win in England to get his monkey off our back.
12 years. I'm fortunate. I've actually seen them win and draw a match in England. A lot of people have been going to games, but Worcester 12 years ago. Yeah, it's law of averages says it'll happen at some stage, but law of averages doesn't always work when you want it to. There's a great prize in this, a home quarter-final. I know Connacht's home form hasn't been brilliant, but a quarter-final, it's another opportunity. There's a huge prize at the end of that, but they've got to get past tomorrow night. And they've got to be aware that a Steve Borthwick side, he's going to have these guys fired up. He's going to have told a few of these guys at Leicester, listen, I know what you say you're doing. I've seen you training. I know what you're telling me about how good you are. We'll go out there and show it now.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's going to be fun.
We're looking forward to it. And but both of these interviews will give you, I think, a good idea of where they're coming from. And as they used to say, let's get it on.
Absolutely. So let's listen to the Leicester stuff first, and then we'll hear Pete Wilkins from the Connacht perspective.
Now, to discuss the Leicester team that has been selected to take on Connacht, I'm delighted to be joined by Adam Whitty, who is the BBC Radio Leicester rugby commentator. Adam, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm a little bit surprised by this team. There's a lot of changes. There's 12 changes to the starting 15. So what are we looking at here? What do you give us a heads up? What do you reckon Steve Borthwick and his coaching team are at?
Well, that's a very good question, because I was surprised as well, I have to say. I wasn't expecting Tigers to make as many changes as they have. They've made 12 for the match, and most of their first team players aren't involved, it has to be said. The reasons for that, I think there's a couple of them. One is that the England internationals, the likes of George Ford, Ellis Genge as well, have to have 2 weeks of rest, not involved in a match day 23. I think they've clearly chosen this as one of them. If Tigers beat Connacht and get through to the quarterfinals, you may see them return the following week for that match. The other reason, I think, is that they're clearly prioritising the Premiership. Tigers are 7th at the moment. They're well primed, really, for a late season charge, thanks to the return of some of these more experienced names. And clearly, Steve Borthwick has decided that that's the main focus in reality. I'm a little bit surprised at that. This is the only chance that Tigers have got for silverware this season. It's unlikely they're going to get into the playoffs of the Premiership and into the top 4. And as I say, they're well placed to get into the top 6. So it didn't really feel like they needed to rest and rotate as much as they have. But Steve Borthwick has clearly decided otherwise.
I suppose, is the drive in the Premiership due to the fact that the last couple of seasons in the Premiership have been really poor for Leicester? They've been right down at the bottom. And he wants to mark this first full season with a constructive finish in the Premiership.
The interesting thing about that is I would say he's already done that. I would say that Tigers fans at the start of the season, considering what happened in the 2 previous seasons, where, as you say, they finished 11th both times. I think they would have been relegated last season if it weren't for Saracens' indiscretions. they would have bitten your hand off for 7th place in the Premiership where they are now. They would have bitten your hand off for probably where they're going to end up, which is probably 1 or 2 places either side of where they are now in 7th. And expectations are pretty low from Tigers fans. And Tigers, I think, can do whatever they want for the rest of the season, really, and they will have done much better than people expected. Steve Borthwick has talked about how this is a long-term thing because Tigers got so bad over such a long period of time. There was such a slow descent that he's going to have to turn around what is basically an oil tanker to try and get them back to where they used to be. And he's done actually very, very well in order to do that. And so to me, this felt a little bit like a free hit, the Challenge Cup, a chance to play their best team, a chance to really go for it, see what happens. But as you say, look, because of the fact that they have struggled so much in the Premiership, and actually they survived the period without their England internationals, which is where they really struggle, and they actually survived that pretty well. He may think that, look, there is a chance of getting certainly 5th or 6th, of getting back into the Champions Cup where Tigers fans will say that they belong. And that's too good an opportunity to pass up.
There's also, I suppose, perhaps he's looking at Connacht and thinking, well, they're missing a few players. Maybe their record in England is appalling, which it really is. 2 wins in since 1997 and a draw is not good. A lot of close games recently. Would he take that into account, or is he the sort of guy that just concentrates on what his team are going to do?
He, you get those cliches, don't you, in your press conferences where they will always focus on those kind of phrases. Steve has sort of said previously that he has an 80-20 scenario where he will think about his team 80% and then focus on the opposition 20% of the time. I think that may have played into his thinking, but I think more than that, I think the way Connacht's play will be in the back of his mind. I think Tigers will be trying basically to play some nasty, gnarly rugby against Connacht and try and restrict that sort of free-flowing stuff that Connacht have the ability to play. That will be his focus, I think, rather than the personnel. And he's picked a team to do that. And Steve Borthwick's teams of late have been about trying to restrict and constrict the opposition. Play pretty boring stuff, I have to say, but it's pretty effective. That, I think, will be in the back of his mind rather than Connacht having some suspension, some injuries and stuff. It will be more of a focus on rotating, on resting some of his best players, seeing if he can get through this match with a victory, but being willing, in all honesty, probably to sacrifice it if needs must.
Yeah, he talked in the press conference during the week there. He answered one of my questions by, "I just want to win," which I think is a fair summation. Winning's a great habit. Connacht have lost their last 3 games when they really should have probably won at least 2 of them. And it is all about momentum. Let's just have a look at this team here. There's a couple of standouts. Ben Young's 254 caps, so he's captain at 9. And then Johnny McPhillips at 10. That's how interesting a selection is McPhillips. Because George Ford is a really good ball. He manages the game brilliantly for the way that Leicester play. He's the ideal candidate. Is McPhillips in the same class as that?
Not from what we have seen so far, but he's a young guy and, of course, came over from Ireland to join Tigers. What's interesting is that he is at 10. Zach Henry, who has been the second in command to George Ford for most of the season while he's been on England duty, is playing fullback. Now, that suggests to me that Tigers are looking to kick. Zach Henry's a very creative player in that 10 role normally, but his kicking has gone up and down in the performances so far. Whereas Johnny McPhillips, when he's come on, and he's been a replacement for most of the season so far, actually, his kicking has been pretty much spot on. And actually, when he came on against Exeter in a game that Tigers lost a couple of weeks ago, replacing Henry, Tigers nearly snatched it because of McPhillips' more accurate kicking. McPhillips has been a replacement for most of the season, as I mentioned, and actually that is largely because they have a number of fly halves at the team. They have Joaquin Diaz-Bonilla, an Argentine international, and Tigers have fallen foul of the fact that they have too many overseas players, and I'll do that with inverted commas, because in the Premiership, South Africans, Pacific Islanders can count as essentially domestic players as well as players from the EU, of course. And McPhillips has been in the team largely because Diaz Bonisha can't be. They've been playing the likes of Thomas Lavanini, Julio Montoya and Mateus Moroni, who starts in this game as well. This is a big opportunity for McPhillips. He hasn't started a game for Tigers since the final game pre-lockdown. So the match they played away at Saracens, which was March the 17th, something like that, I think. No, it wouldn't have been, about March the 7th, I think it was. He hasn't featured since then. Really big opportunity for him. Him and Young's playing together tells me Tigers are going to follow what has been a common recipe so far in their games. A lot of kicking, a lot of playing for territory, and you might not see a particularly creative approach from Tigers. That's what it suggests.
Yeah, I'm interested as well in Moroni. He's only played 9 times at 13. I was very impressed actually last week when I had a look at the Newcastle game with Dan Kelly, who was in the centre there, but he's on the bench. So is Scott and Moroni, again, is that a fairly defensive centre partnership?
It is. It's been actually what we've seen a lot from Tigers throughout most of the season so far. But it's sort of faded away slightly. That was the centre partnership for the first 5-6 games from when Moroni joined at the start of the campaign. But since then, Dan Kelly has done extraordinarily well, actually, and has possibly forced Scott out of the team slightly. I think he's been brought in as a bit of rotation. Scott played incredibly well at 13 against Exeter. Him and Kelly created a really nice partnership there when Moroni was rested for that game. Centres is one of the weakest areas for Tigers, and they haven't quite worked out who's going to go where. They pretty much have 4 13s and maybe 1 12, because Scott hasn't quite been able to find his feet in at 12. His creative abilities doesn't quite work with the way that Borthwick wants to play. So it may be that Dan Kelly is the first choice 12 at the moment, but he's still a young guy. I think he's only 19. Moroni is a fierce competitor. Big hits, really strong defensively, the type of player that chases back at full tilt to try and get he's put in some brilliant defensive tackles. I remember a tap tackle against Wasps when the game was in the balance that pretty much won it for them. And then when they played against Bristol, he came out and was pumped up for that one. Tigers, a second choice Tigers, nearly upset Bristol that day, actually. They played incredibly well. But that partnership there is full of experience, full of quality, pair of internationals as well. It's just, I suppose, that hasn't quite worked, those two together in at 13 and 12 so far for Tigers. So it'll be interesting to see whether they can find a little bit of fluency, having been together for a little bit longer on the training field over the past few weeks.
Yeah, it's probably a bit of an issue for Connacht. Obviously, Bundy Aki is missing. Bundy Aki against this chap Moroni, competitiveness. That would have been worth the admission money if fans could get in. Let's have a look at the pack here. Complete change in the front row. So Ellis Genge, who's a man who has an interesting reputation. Although I thought he had a fine game against Newcastle. He just got on with his rugby. Obviously Tom Youngs and then Dan Cole. So it's, and as well then the two of the replacement front row players are on the bench are making their debuts. So that's an interesting scenario.
It is. And that front three is actually very interesting for Tigers. You've got Luan de Bruyn there, who's, a very experienced South African who has been filling in for Ellis Genge and has done a fine job with it as well. Charlie Clare, before Steve Borthwick joined, was one of those squad players that you never really heard of. He was never involved for Tigers, but Steve Borthwick has brought the best out of him. And he's been really influential this season. I think Charlie would admit himself that, look, he is not the most gifted hooker in the world, but he works incredibly hard at his craft and has improved dramatically under Steve Borthwick. He's in his late 20s, but he's really found a new wind in his career, really. And Joe Hayes then is the young future star for for Tigers, coming in behind Dan Cole. He's been the apprentice for him. Cole's been the tight head at Tigers and the first choice for pretty much the best part of 10, 12 years now. and Hayes will be in an England shirt. He's already been called up into the squad a couple of times. He was in the shadow squad for the Six Nations as well. And he's a brilliant prospect for Tigers. So that front row is really interesting, actually. And yes, the replacement front row, Nick Dolly has never played for Tigers before, recently joined from Championship side Coventry. James Whitcomb's only made 2 or 3 appearances. He's in England under 20, 18, 19. Will Hurd in line for his debut as well. So at the 60-minute mark, when Tigers normally tend to change their entire front row, it's going to be a very interesting period of the game because there's a lot of experience, a lot of quality in the first choice front row, but there is not a lot of experience in that second front three. So I'm fascinated to see what happens when those 3 players come on, because clearly they're going to get quite a lot of game time, I think.
Discipline's been an issue for Leicester this season. And it's become look, Connacht have 2 players. I know one of them was suspended for Ireland, but I mean, the team captain's out because he got a red card in a game. And it's all a bit up in the air with referees' decisions and stuff. But would that be a concern, do you think, to them in this type of game, especially with a referee they'll never have encountered before?
Well, you asked Steve Borthwick about this, and it did come up in that press conference, didn't he, where he was asked about it. And his answer, I don't think, was entirely convincing, which was, well, players have been sent off and yellow carded for very different things. And I don't think that really washes, because that just tells us really that actually discipline across the board is a problem. Players like Jasper Wiese who came back from a 4-week ban against Newcastle and got yellow carded within about 25 minutes again. Look, there is clearly a problem there. Cobus van Veek was sent off in the game against Exeter for a high tackle. There have been periods quite a few times over the past 6 or 7 weeks where Tigers have been down to 13 men. That's happened at least twice that I can think of, and possibly even 3 times actually in their past 6 or 7 matches. And so it is a problem. But Tigers with Borthwick are pretty solid at the sort of dark arts element of the game, and they're going to get caught out for that. Sometimes I think they have a really fiery, gnarly pack, and sometimes they're going to make mistakes. And what Steve Borthwick wants their players to do is work incredibly hard, push themselves to the limit. And again, I think sometimes that means that players just overstep the mark a little bit. You look at all the things that have happened. They have never looked malicious or malevolent in in the action itself. They have just looked like players trying to play on the edge and going a little bit too far. But I think that's how Steve Borthwick likes it. I think that's what makes Tigers such a formidable team in their forwards. But it also means that from time to time, they're going to get a player yellow carded or red carded. They've actually done okay though whenever that has happened. They fought back. When they played against Exeter, they played 65 minutes with 14 men, nearly won it. They beat Wasps comfortably, down to 13 men at the end of the game, and with 14 men for most of it. So they've been able to do without it relatively well. But it is an issue. It is an issue for Tigers, no matter what Steve Borthwick says.
Yeah, I just have a feeling that somehow I can see the referee and decisions and TMOs are going to be part of tomorrow night. Yeah. It's modern rugby, but it just has that sort of edge to it, because it's a very important game for both sides. I mean, Connacht's Pro 14 season has finished, so they've only got Europe and the Rainbow Cup. And we won't even go into that competition because none of us really know what's going on with it. Looking at the bench, going away from the front row, is there anybody in the 3 back replacements who could really change this game? Am I right in saying he's gone 5-3 on the bench?
You are, yes. So looking at that, it looks like Zach Henry, if they want to replace the fly half, Zach Henry may come in and replace him at fullback. It's Dan Kelly is a potential game changer defensively and attackingly. He's done pretty well actually so far, but he's a young guy, so we're still seeing mixed performances from him, as is Freddie Stuart. Now, Freddie Stuart will wear an England jersey at some stage in his career. He's only 20, but he is exceptional under the high ball. And is just a really brave, hard worker when he can come on the replacements bench there. So those two are inexperienced, but very talented. And so have mixed performances, but do have the ability to change the game. Ben White is a solid scrum half replacement. He was the second choice, actually, behind Ben Young's last season, but since they brought in Richard Wigglesworth and Jack Van Portfleet, one of the academy products, has overtaken him. He's dropped into fourth place, really, but he's like a terrier, Ben White. He's such a passionate player on the field, and is solid as a replacement 9, it has to be said, at the very least. So those are three pretty solid players. I have to say, I don't think there is someone, in answer to your question, that is going to come on and revolutionise the game. They are solid players who have been, certainly in the case of Kelly and Stewart, regular first team players, but I think will be brought on for solidity rather than their ability to come on and play free-flowing, brilliant rugby. Yet they'll be there to do the because of Stewart's good work under the high ball and Dan Kelly's defensive work. Borthwick will be hoping to bring them on when they're winning, I would suggest, rather than to change the game if they're losing.
Adam, if you had to put a hard-earned £5 on this game, who do you think's going to win? And would you have an idea of a margin?
So we had Rob Murphy, of course, of Your Paris on our Tigers Rugby show this week, and he made me a lot more confident, I have to say, about Tigers' chances from the way that Connacht have been playing because of the suspensions and injuries in the team. But I think Connacht want this more at the moment on paper, from what we've been hearing Andy Friend saying in the build-up, and the players as well in the press conference ahead of the game. But Tigers will try and play a pretty horrible brand of rugby that I think will just be able to stifle Connacht if they're able to get a foothold in the game. It will all be about who can get a foothold in it and who can enforce their style on the other. And so my hard-earned £5, I think it's going to be incredibly tight, too close to call, but I think Tigers' home advantage will just get it over the line for them. I'm saying Tigers by one try, or by 7 or less, probably 3 or 4 points would be my prediction.
Let's have a look at this Connacht team. That's about the strongest team you could select with suspensions and injuries.
It is, yeah. We've had a good think over. You obviously take into account who's been training well over these few weeks, who's put their hands up in recent games. But you come back to the same names, and it is some of our more experienced guys, and they've earned the right to sort of go into battle on our behalf this weekend. So we're excited about the team we picked, and I think we've got a good opportunity.
Yeah, it's pretty well established. I suppose the centre, Sean O'Brien in the centre, is probably the least experienced player in the starting 15, and he's going to have a big job on defensively. It's up to Tom Daley and I suppose Jack Carty to help him out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair comment. I mean, Tom Daley's been never present for us, and he's a real rock for us in that midfield. And he's a defensive leader. He's part of our defensive leadership group in terms of, I suppose, the running of our system and some of the mindset stuff behind how we're trying to defend. But he's also been very important for us in attack in terms of assisting Jack with that extra pair of eyes outside of him. So that's something that, Sean has been really ably supported by. And, he's fed off that. It leaves Sean really to worry about doing his job and playing what's in front of him. And we've been really pleased with the progress that Sean's made in that respect. And I know he's really excited by the challenge as well.
Yeah, how did training go this week? There's a lot of players putting their hands up, and I suspect there's a few disappointed players as well who haven't made the 23.
Yeah, there always is. And, the nature of our squad and the way that Andy manages it across the year is he wants to give everyone opportunities, and, guys will get that chance for game time. And with that, the real positive is you get this a match sharpness and I suppose a cohesion about your group in terms of developing all those different combinations across the season. But you also build up an element of expectation that these guys are now on that stage and they're proving themselves. And, that's a great challenge for us then to have to work through those names and see who is most appropriate for that week. And of course, there'll be guys disappointed. And it's not just the guys who, maybe a little further down the pecking order in form. It's also looking at the combinations, particularly around positions like the back three, and the back row, of course, you know, the combinations you go with there tend to then impact what you look at in those positions on the bench as well. So it's not just as simple as picking, you know, your best 23. It's often those combinations that have a knock-on effect as well as to who else gets involved. So no, it's not been straightforward. We've had lots of meetings about it, but no, there's a real alignment there amongst the staff, and you know, I think we've got the right mix for this week.
Yeah, I suppose there was an issue. You know, Kieran Marmion or Caelan Blade, they've been jockeying for position all season at 9. Kieran maybe has a little bit more experience, and it must be fairly obvious to say Jack Carty has a big job here, because he's going to have to try to run this game. There's probably going to be a fair bit of kicking in it, and it's getting the right type of kicks, either getting the ball off the park or getting it to grass. It's decision making is going to have to be really sharp here.
Yeah, it will be. I think that's fair comment. And if you look at the way that Leicester play, you know, they generally don't want to play too many rucks in their own half, which means from our point of view, we'll get some launch opportunities from lineouts, but we'll also get a fair amount of ball kicked to us and some counter-attack opportunities. So the decision-making around those run and kick decisions in counter-attack will be really important to us. And as you said, then in turn, our own kicking game. And it's a balance, because, you know, some of our better performances, I think back to our trip to the RDS and that win against Leinster, was where we kicked long, and certainly we look to push them back and use that field position to then launch our attacks from. So we got some good pay from that. But then last week, you know, some of the few positives about the Scarlets' performance was how effective we were running from deep. So there's some really interesting kind of connotations to weigh up in terms of what you then select for this game, I suppose, as a strategy, but also in the moment, if you are genuinely empowering the players to make their decisions based on what's in front of them, is how they pick from that menu. So it's interesting, a lot of our training time and our meeting time this week, it's not been so much about introducing new patterns or new plays or learning things that we might not have covered before. It's more about that decision making in the moment of how you actually go about, when do we kick long and pin them back as opposed to going contestable, and equally, when do we strike and really have a crack at them, because you know we need to go there and fire some shots, and it's a really important part of our identity, and it'll be an important part of our game this weekend as well.
It might be the sort of game, Pete, where there isn't as many opportunities to fire an attacking shot. It's going to be key when you're inside their 22 to come away with something every time. It's probably been a little weakness maybe in the games, thinking more against Munster and Edinburgh, when opportunities when Connacht were on top, they didn't quite seize it, because it's going to be a tough old game. The side they've selected is not as maybe as strong as people would have expected it to be, but they're still going to play the Leicester way.
No, they will. I think that's one of the things that Steve Borthwick's, really drilled down into, is that Leicester identity, and he's certainly trying to, or certainly has, I suppose, reinvigorated that physicality and that toughness that they've had. As I said already about the field position aspect for them being important, but the driving maul, physicality in defence, very direct, powerful ball carriers coming from deep. You obviously got Jasper Wiese in the back row, who's done good things for them this year, but also the wingers, whoever they pick across that back three. There's guys that enjoy carrying into traffic, so there's a real physical challenge there. And as you said, on the flip side of that, it means when we get our opportunities, we do need to take them. And for us, reflecting on this season so far, there's certain key metrics we'll always look at after a game. Things such as the penalty count and whether we've won or lost, that seems to have a pretty big impact on us winning and losing. But as you said, access to the opposition's 22, when we're coming away with points from those periods in the opposition 22, they tend to be the games where we win. And when that drops below a certain level, we're obviously giving up opportunities there, and they're the games we reflected on. It's normally quite a key part of our review. So, against this team that will be physical and will look to get stuck into us around that breakdown, slow down our ball, it's really important that when we do earn the right to get that field position in their 22, that we do make the most of it. And whether that's penalties, whether that's tries, those sort of points per entry, as we refer to it as, will be crucial.
Just looking at the Pro 14 season overall, very odd. I mean, more away wins than home, so disappointing home performances. Overall, is 8-8 a poor reflection on how well Connacht played at times this season? That
yes.
games kind of 50% isn't really what you were looking for.
No, I think there's so many different angles that can give you a different perception, and 50% win rate in our mind is too low. We want to be above that, definitely. We won 8 games, lost 8 games, as you said. Last year we won 8 games and lost 7. So we've actually won the same amount of games last year, but we finished second in the conference compared to finishing 4th previously. So on conference position and the ramifications of that in terms of Champions Cup, it's obviously a big positive for us. But if you actually drill down to the games won and games lost, there'll be frustrations there. You go down another level from that, look at how some of those games were lost. And as you refer, there's we're talking a few games there where we've probably been in control at times, and it's that last 20 minutes or so, sometimes more, sometimes less, but it's certainly that last period of the game where we let it slip. So you drill into those and look at what's controllable and what are the recurring themes in that. So there will be frustration, and it's important that we don't hide from that. It's easy to say second place in the Conference Champions Cup. That should be celebrated. I think that's really important for us as an organisation. That's really important, particularly when it's been a bit of a topsy-turvy season all round. But at the same time, we've got to face up to the fact that where we need to improve. And probably across my 4 years here, we've probably gone through a couple of different cycles. We've had a phase, maybe when I first came, where we almost found our bravado in terms of how we played the game once we were behind on the scoreboard, or once we felt that there was nothing to lose. I think that's why we often did pretty well in Interpros, because the perception was we were the underdog and we could just rip in without fear of consequence. And I think we've evolved and grown from that to being a team that can take a lead and can actually assert themselves on an opposition from the start of games. But obviously the next stage now is to control games and close them out. So they're the themes that we'll be looking for as we review this season, I suppose, but also the themes that we'll be trying to remedy in the short term with this trip to Leicester and the Rainbow Cup to come as well.
I'm tempted to say that most of this side really has selected itself, but a couple of ones in the substitutes bench. Oisin Dowling, is that because he can cover second row and back row? And Abraham Papaili, who we've seen on occasions make a big difference in games, a couple of times negatively, but more positive recently.
Yeah, Oisin does give us that flexibility in terms of covering second row and back row. I think the man that's probably been a bit unlucky in this selection is Keem Brendagast, because for a young guy just coming through, he's made such an impression on us in the game time he's had. We could see it at training, and then he stepped up to the plate in those opportunities of game time he's had as well. And he'd be in a similar bracket, similar to Oisin, in that he can cover second row and lock. So between the pair of them, we've got some pretty good resources going forwards. At this stage, we think Oisin's just a little bit more senior, a bit more experienced. His maul defence is outstanding. Certainly when he's not been in the starting pack for us, he's wreaking havoc on the training field in those forwards unit sessions. So there's a huge amount of respect within the group around his ability there at that set piece from an attack point of view, but also from that defensive point of view. So Oisin's just a nose ahead at the moment, and we're really excited about what he can bring off the bench. Abraham, he's had a topsy-turvy time in terms of obviously not so much settling into the team, because he's a real popular member of the group, and I think he's found his feet in terms of the geographical move, but just that absence of game time. And as you said, a lot of that was due to negative reasons with the suspensions early on, and then he had a niggly ankle injury that kept him out when he could have got back a little sooner. So he's not really been able to find that rhythm, but we are really excited by what we've seen when he's been firing on all cylinders, and we think that's something that's only going to improve. So I suppose the big decision for us was, do you start him in a game like this to try and make those early inroads and go toe-to-toe with Jasper Wiese, or do you bring him on for an impact maybe a little bit later in the game? Part of our thinking in this, as you said, there'll be a fair amount of kicking in this, fair amount of kick chase early on. So having a fresh Abraham coming off the bench once both sets of players have had some running in their legs probably is no bad thing for us. So yeah, it's a pretty good two good weapons really in Oisin and Abraham to have on the bench. So we'll expect them to get a decent amount of game time as well.
What's the one key thing Connacht need to get right to come out of Leicester with a win, which is a rarity for them in England? It's just one of those anomalies that's there. But there's a great prize at the end of this, which is a home quarter final. What are you looking for? What do you need to see early in this game that says we're on it here?
It's our mindset, to be honest, the mentality of how we approach this game, William, and we've talked about it all week. That's partly in respect of going to Welford Road and playing Leicester in a knockout game, and as you said, going over to England where we've not had the results in recent times. But it's also in response to that Scarlets performance, which wasn't good enough. And the bulk of the review there was not about technique and systems. It was about not having that edge to our mindset or our mentality going into that game. There were guys who were doing things right in terms of their own role and their own system, but we lacked guys, I suppose, going above and beyond themselves to run the team, to communicate with others and organise others and problem solve on behalf of others. There was a little bit of passiveness there, and I hate to use that word, but we were pretty brutal in our review of that, and the boys have owned that. And if anything, it's the best possible wake-up call you can have going into a fixture like this. So we'll see that around our work rate of line speed in defence, our speed off the ground, our kick chase. We'll see it around the collisions with our tackle work, whether that's one-man tackles or double shots. We'll see it with our ball carry. Obviously, the maul defence, the set piece will all come into that. But all of that will come back to our mindset. And if we're at the races this weekend, I think we've got a great opportunity. And so the important bit is we've had a pretty brutal wake-up call, last time out, and we've acknowledged that. And we've set about fixing that from the very first day we're back into training. And all the noises the boys have made this week have been along those lines. So if we front up with that headspace right, we'll be in with a real opportunity. And as you said, it's an exciting reward in terms of a home quarter final.
When you're trying to fix things like that and you work through it, and you've said the review was brutal, but is it still on the day? Do players, they don't really know until their back is against the wall in this game, and they have to be. That's tough to get right, isn't it? Because your mind can go back over situations that haven't worked out for you.
Yeah, it can be tough. I think probably it's tougher for coaches because, as a coach, you wait for the kickoff to really see what happens. And, we've over the years, you can have the world's best captain's run or a great training week or even a brilliant warm-up, and then have a real flatness about you once the game kicks off, and vice versa. You can be tearing your hair out all week. You can be worried about the warm-up being a little bit quiet or the captain's run being a little bit off, and the boys come out absolutely firing. So quite often it's pretty hard to read in the build-up as a coach. And I think the best guide, the best barometer are the players themselves, because they feel that energy around each other. They have obviously a good understanding of how they're feeling themselves. And, there's no guarantee from that whether the passes will stick or the moves will work, but you can normally get a pretty good read from them about how they're feeling, where they are at mentally going into a game. And so there are a few phone calls even, going around on the day after that Scarlets game between coaches and players and players and just checking in with each other and saying, right, okay, this has happened and we acknowledge that. But, how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? Because we're not going all the way over to Leicester to watch something like that. And immediately the players are onto it. And in terms of the conversations they're having with each other, but also acknowledging what they need to do in the preparation during the week to make sure they arrive in that right place. So I think the players are the true barometer of that. And as I said, the noises coming out this week have been thoroughly positive. And there's a pretty steely determination then to get the job done.
Talking of coaches, it's been an interesting 10 days for Connacht. Nigel Carolan, we heard last week, is leaving at the end of the season, part of the furniture. And then Jimmy Duffy, also part of the furniture, we heard a couple of days ago, is leaving. But you're changing your role next season. So give me a heads up on what's involved in that.
Yeah, there has been a bit of change. Obviously, Nigel and Jimmy moving on, they've been here for so long and they're such well-respected and trusted members of our organisation, I suppose. So, part of that has been, obviously, as you said, the last week or two has been around everyone processing that and acknowledging that. But yes, it's an exciting change for me. I'll be looking at a role as senior coach and attack. So I suppose the senior coach piece is sitting between the other assistant coaches and Andy as head coach. And I guess overseeing all areas of the rugby program, of the on-field piece. We'll be looking to really drill down into defining our rugby identity. I suppose Connacht have an identity as a place and a club, but really drilling into that and making sure our playing style continues to reflect that. So that will be on my remit. Our coaching philosophy in terms of how all of us coach and deliver our sessions on field will be another bit, and then I guess leading the rugby strategy. So making sure that all of the areas from set piece to attack to defence to the kicking game, making sure those areas are as aligned as possible to give us that cohesion, I suppose, in terms of what we're doing strategically. So that's the senior coach piece for me, and it's a step up, and it's something I'm really looking forward to. And then obviously the change to coaching the attack as well is something I've been really interested in and looking forward to doing. I started out as a skills coach on that side of the ball back in Super Rugby with the Reds. Ended up as a defence coach, really because that was the current opportunity going as I was looking to progress through that Reds setup, and I've been there now for 7 years. So I guess I've spent that 7 years obviously trying to stop other attacks, looking at them in a lot of detail, seeing what works, and also seeing what's probably talked about a lot but maybe isn't as effective. So I've got some pretty strong ideas around how best the game can be played, and as I said, respecting what we've done at Connacht and what's been successful. It's important that we maintain that, but I think there's some other things we can layer on there. So the attack piece will be alongside the senior coach role, and as I said, I'm looking forward to that change up.
It's big boots to fill in terms of attack and replacing Nigel. And I'm also interested in, you're talking about the rugby ethos of Connacht, or what you want to project. Has the chip on the shoulder mentality that Connacht often used very positively over the years, punch above their weight, has that been lost slightly at the moment? Is that something that you need to get back? Even in looking at performances at the sports ground, teams used to come here and expect a certain type of Connacht, and maybe they haven't quite seen that this season.
Look, I think it's a fair question to ask. The chip on the shoulder and that underdog mentality, I think that can be incredibly powerful. I think it's something that if you can harness in the right way, it can give you that relentlessness and that urgency and that determination to prove people wrong. And I think in terms of our identity as a place and as a club, I think that should be important to us. And as you said, performances at the sports ground in particular probably reflect where we're at with that. The danger of going down that route or going down that route in the wrong way is that it can become an excuse or a crutch for being the honourable loser, for playing, particularly in your interpros, putting up a good fight but not quite getting there. And I think the danger is you can become too satisfied by that, by being the gallant loser. And actually it's how you maintain that identity and that edge that I suppose underdog or chip on the shoulder mentality gives you, without feeling that you need to aim higher and aim to actually overtake other teams, whether they're in Ireland or whether they're in the competition with the Pro 14 or Europe. You've still got to be aspirational and ambitious with it. So I think if you harness it in the right way, it can give you that edge, and it could be pretty powerful. But I do think you've got to be careful not to have it lurking in the background as a crutch, particularly when there's maybe been a history of being the poorer cousin and treated a little bit differently, and maybe then the results matching that. So, look, I think it is going to be important to us going forwards, but it's going to be important we embrace it in the right way.